On the one hand, I think that particular early adolescence, mid-adolescence is an enormously important time for friendships and creating intimacy, emotional disclosure, often in same-sex friendships. And to what extent does cell phone use influences? Because texting, posting something on Instagram is different than having a long conversation with somebody. It's a much different form of communication. How does it change it? It's also the whole non-verbal part of communication, like indicating what emotion another person has. I mean, you can put an emoji next to it, but the subtlety of emotional expression and recognizing these emotional expressions is different when you use it through a cell phone. Therefore, it's an interesting idea. How do these patterns change? Interesting idea also, does it affect their mental health? Because the depression, and particularly in girls, has been linked to social media use, and their Facebook blues is a notion that you find.
Yes.
It is not just that the quantity and then also the type of screen time that you have plays a role, but also the social context again comes in, because in one study in Great Britain they found that excessive screen time again had a negative effect on mental health, but the negative effect was only 1/3 of that of getting a regular breakfast in the morning. Therefore, therefore it's a family situation, the context, and maybe then screen time and unregulated screen time is just an expression of family chaos that is there and really the driving force behind it.
And I remember when I hit puberty, which was not a fun time for me. I didn't really want to.
Is it ever?
I don't think anybody really enjoys it, but I really didn't welcome it. And I'm seeing how slow a process it is. Because in my head, it's just like, I was a kid and then I was a teenager and it was awful, you know. But it takes years for your body to change. I stopped eating and I still, I don't know, I should do some deep Freudian work or something. What was that about?
Yeah.
I just stopped eating. There's the feminist part of me is thinking, was that just self-preservation? You know, did I have some kind of fear of what was to come in this pretty hostile culture we live in that wasn't particularly supportive of girls, and I didn't feel like a girl necessarily. Yeah. But I didn't welcome this. I didn't want to have a female body at the time. So I kind of wonder if that was part of it.
And history, of course, is telling a story. And history can be written many different ways, depending on whose stories you listen to and whose stories you prioritize, and how you integrate or not the places where the stories don't mesh well. And so storytelling is central to the work that I've done trying to understand gender, in that my research method is interviewing. And so I would seek out people who had the stories to tell that I was interested in and have them tell their stories, listen very carefully, and then try and take bigger lessons from the individual stories or the composite of the individual stories that teach us something about the social forces at work.
Yeah, like when I came out of the closet in the late 80s, it was just common knowledge that if you were, say, a woman and you came out and you had a kid, well, you would lose your child, you would lose custody. Because the majority of judges would just think, well, you're unfit to be a mother, you're, a sexual deviant. And somehow now I'm married. I never thought that was a path I'd go down, or that I would be allowed to marry a woman and have a child. Yeah. And my name is on my daughter's birth certificate. It was quite early on, so she was born in 2009, and I didn't realize that was going to happen. And when it came in the mail, my partner and myself are on the birth certificate. And now I think you can get 2, 3, 4 people on birth certificates. It's going to mess up the genealogists, that's for sure. Yeah. Confuse people.
And so again, I'm trying to learn, how does gender work? How do we understand it? How do we communicate it? And people who change their gender certainly go through a life transition that is very profound, but everyone around them also goes through a life transition that's quite profound. And everyone around them goes through a transition because they have to learn to see an individual that they knew one way, an entirely different way. And on top of that, for most people, that process causes them to understand gender quite differently than they did before. So there's a ripple effect. It's not just about one person changing, but everyone around them.
Network of relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have been interested in gender for many, many years, and I think by now I do get it. But that's what motivated me in the beginning to start exploring gender, because I was, earlier in my life, a very gender non-conforming person. Today I'm pretty conforming. But I was a very gender non-conforming person earlier in my life, and I didn't communicate well to other people how I wanted them to see me, how I wanted them to understand me. An interesting life stages question that most people never really stop to think about that is unique to trans people are for those trans people who transition as adults. So all of us, trans or not, and not, by the way, is called cis, C-I-S, at puberty, we're under the influence of hormones. Our bodies are changing rapidly. We have to learn how to live in bodies that are changing. And we're also, for most people, go through a very awkward teenage stage where they try and figure out what's the right look for them. And this is that awkward teenage stage where you wear weird outfits and you do funny things with your hair, and if you're a woman, you do funny things with your makeup, and maybe you pierce something that you later regret, or maybe you get a tattoo somewhere that you wish you hadn't. And that's kind of typical teenage angst. If you're a trans person, you go through all of that, and that is extremely uncomfortable because you're going through it in the wrong body, in the wrong gender. And then, if you transition as an adult, more and more people are transitioning at that same time, but if you transition as adult, which is still very common, then that happens again when you're an adult. So you go on a hormone regimen, which puts you through a different puberty, the one you wanted in the first place, but now you're doing it at 25 or 35 or 45 or even 55. And your body is changing. And once again, you have to figure out how to be in this body that is awkward and not one you're accustomed to. You're under the influence of raging hormones. It's not very different from being a teenager. So you're being bashed about by the hormones as an adult. And then you have to figure out also what your look is going to be. And you go through this whole awkward stage of, gee, your mother dresses you funny. And you're doing this as an adult, and you're doing this in front of people who know you, and you're trying to hold down a job. If you're lucky, a lot of trans people lose their jobs at this point, if they have them. But this is a different kind of transition as an adult. It's a life stage that you repeat. It's a second puberty. And usually you go through it more smoothly and quickly than you did the first time because you have the benefit of a certain amount of maturity. But there's no avoiding the barrage of hormones and what that does to you. And it's really very difficult to find your footing in what your look is going to be without some missteps. Nobody accomplishes puberty easily, and it doesn't matter that it's the second time in your adult, it's still very disruptive. So that's another life stage that happens to trans people that doesn't happen to everyone else. And I think it's important to recognize, again, coming back to the gender theme as well, that how we do gender and what gender means changes as we move through the life cycles. So the meaning of gender for a 14-year-old is quite different than for a 25-year-old, which is quite different again for a 45-year-old. And by the time you're 65 or 85, each of these stages of life what it means for you
Yes.
changes.
I so agree.
It is not a static thing.
No.
And so I think it's important for all of us to be learning from each other in both directions.